Well, hello and welcome to this short video as we continue to explore the Bible book of Revelation. And we're into chapter 17. We're in the second half of that chapter today in verses 7 to 18, and this is what they say. Then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw was once, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come." This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads of the 7 hills on which the woman sits, they are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. The beast, who once was and now is not, is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7, is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose, and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Then the angel said to me, "Well, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire, for God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purposes by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth." So we're taking on a slightly longer passage today as we delve into the explanation of the mysteries that John saw in the first half of chapter 17 that we explored in our last video last week. The terms beast and prostitute and 7 heads and 10 horns all make this hard to grasp for us today, and if we're not careful, lead us into some unhealthy and sometimes downright dangerous speculations as to what John is telling us about. But we've come across 7s and 10s before in Revelation, and we must remember that they're used symbolically. Numbers are important as symbols. We've come across the prostitute as well, who is the personification of all and any evil empire that refuses, or evil culture that refuses to worship the one true God and his Christ Jesus, the Lamb who was slain but is now alive. And we know that adultery is one of the main descriptors of unfaithfulness to God and his Messiah Jesus, the Son of God. So that it makes sense that it is against God that all this is happening, and it's described in a way, in the way of adultery. And we've come across the beast before too, seemingly powerful enough to lure kings and rulers of the world, but ultimately under God's sovereign control. So anything we've read today, we shouldn't be intimidated by. We can understand it. The great thrust of the explanation of the angel to John is that he need not be astonished. The overall emphasis is on those who are against God, described and personified as the beast and the prostitute and the kings that give authority, and those who follow the beast and the prostitute. For John's original readers, actually they would have recognised this as Rome, the Empire of Rome. The description is key. In verse 9, the woman, the prostitute, sits on 7 hills, and which is a clear allusion to Rome, which is built as it is on 7 hills. For John readers, there was that clear indication then of the Roman Empire and the emperor, who was persecuting but also demanded their worship in the emperor cult. It was a manifestation of all that was against God, the beast. But there's more going on, as there usually is in Revelation. The mention of 7 kings tells us that they're about a kind of transfer of power, and back in verse 8 we're told that the beast once was and now is not and will be again, but only for judgment. And what we're being told here is that Satan and evil are a manifestation of human culture and government and authority on a kind of recurring basis. They once were, sometimes they're not, and they come again, and sometimes they're not. And broadly, we sometimes get good government, then more often we get corrupt or bad government at different levels and different ways. Think back through history and you'll see that ebb and flow. And those who are not Christians are astonished at this. There at the end of verse 8 it says that. Those whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world can't get their heads around this. Think about it today. How often do we hear that some event or some catastrophe or genocide or persecution of a minority shouldn't happen because it's now the 21st century? It is 2021 after all, people say. The assumption is that humans can progress to a form of utopia all on their own. And that is inevitable. As time passes, things will get better. And so when things like the Chinese persecution of the Uyghur people, or the catastrophic war games that have been happening in Israel against Palestine, and their reaction as well, the Palestinian reaction, or the numerous cases of numerous instances of hard nationalism that have been bubbling up across the Western world across the last 10 years or so, it ends up always persecuting minorities. Well, our world tries to explain this and condemn this by saying, well, it's 2021, that shouldn't happen. It tries to explain it away or ignore it in some senses, but it cannot make sense of why there's this repeat. There is no place for sin or evil in our cultural narrative, and that's because of the myth of progress. But Revelation here sets us absolutely right. Kingdoms and empires and cultures will rise and fall, and at the core are evil and against God, his Messiah, God's Son, Jesus Christ, and we're not to be astonished. We're to act and to live in wisdom. That's the call there in verse 9. In the end, though, as a golden thread running through this chapter, all of this is actually under the authority of God. It's not as if we're in a cyclical, historical world that things just repeat themselves. They are going somewhere as well. God is in charge. The manifestations of the beast in the form of empires and kingdoms will wage war against the Lamb, that is Jesus, but the Lamb will win. Why? Because God's victory comes through suffering. At the other end of suffering is the victory of Jesus, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, as he's described in this passage. Ultimately, we who worship the Lamb who was slain but is now alive, Jesus Christ, will be victorious with him. In verses 15 to 18, the beast turns against the prostitute. Evil people who propped up evil empire will turn against her and devour her. The evil empire might seem to have all the nations and multitudes and peoples from every language, but in the end, they will turn and destroy. And that's just what happened to Rome, which was sacked by the people that it had once ruled over. This is in fact God's doing. He has put it into their hearts to do this, and so as to accomplish his purposes, and so that his words and his promises might be fulfilled. The people are not absolved of responsibility. They will be judged as the nations and empires who worship the beast. But again, we're told through this chapter, and whatever appears to be happening on earth, whatever evil is succeeding and looks like it's impossible to stop, actually is under the authority, ultimate authority, of the one true God, who has made Jesus Christ to be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And the beast and the prostitute will be held to account. Judgment, righteous, good, just judgment is coming. In the next chapter, we enter chapter 18, where we'll start next video. We're going to find that we're back to the great metaphor of the personification of Satan, the evil manifested in human culture, Babylon the Great, the archetypal enemy of God, his Messiah Jesus, and Jesus' people, the church. And we will find that she is judged.